I start, I would actually just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Can you see that presentation?
Yeah, and thanks, Todd. I needed
That's all right.
to have done that.
That's all right. And pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that we all come from different countries. And I am really grateful for the care of the land, seas and waterways that the Aboriginal people do in the area that I come from, and I'm in Yuin country on the New South Wales South Coast. So let's crack on. So a bit of an outline. That's the Mobile Simulation Centre. I hope you can see that. And we, sorry, let me go back a bit. There we go. So that's the Mobile Simulation Centre, and today we're just going to talk about distance educator models and equipment models and how we try to get health-related simulation out and about. And that photo was taken at the back of Burke. So that's our Mobile Simulation Centre. The trailer is a 28-tonne truck that opens up, and it's part of the Rural Mobile Simulation Centre. It's not all of it, part of it, and it's a big logistical, tricky part of our program. So I wasn't sure who the audience would be today, but I'm making the assumption, Pip, are you from Health? Yep, and Vinod, you're from, Pip's not from Health?
I'm from Family Planning New South Wales.
Beautiful. All right. And Vinod, you're not from a health background. So, and I'm not sure about Libby. So, you know, I've just kind of put in a little bit because I wasn't quite sure who the audience would be. A valuable tool to improve patient safety. It focuses on the technical and the non-technical skills. And human systems and factors are recognised as a high and a big cause of morbidity and mortality. And we, oh, for goodness sake, we really focus on postgraduate placements. So these are people who are not undergraduates, they're already employed in the New South Wales health system. New South Wales Health has got 160,000 employees, clinical and non-clinical, and we work predominantly with the clinical staff. But in rural communities, when you've got 3 staff on and something goes wrong, you might be calling your cleaner in to give you a hand. There is evidence that supports that the linkages of simulation training to patient outcomes, that skill retention can actually last for up to 1 year. But it's like any skill, you need to practice it. So when we talk to our clinicians about doing simulation, some people have had a negative experience. Some people claim that simulation just teaches you how to be good at simulation, as opposed to you're nothing more than an athlete. So a swimmer will swim, a runner runs, and as a clinician, you need to practice your craft as well. Everything we pretty much do is a simulation in human factors wrapped in something. So it might be a deteriorating patient or some complication of something. So with our human factors, we consider task management, the situational awareness, teamwork, communication, decision-making, leadership, and we don't call it followership, it's active team participation. So followership kind of has that connotation of I'm just going to be a passenger and come along in the team, versus an active team participation. I'm going to be an active team member, and the concept of leaders at all levels. We talk about graded assertiveness and crew or crisis resource management in the confines of what happens rurally. The system factors, we talk about patient flow. There's time pressures, poor information transfer, staffing ratios, there won't be many of them in a country town, resource pressures, patient acuity, and the lack of standardisation. Yes, it still happens. So there's some of the system factors. We're getting better at it. We've got a lot of pathways that we use. For example, the acute myocardial pathway or the STEMI pathway or the sepsis pathway. Just follow the recipe. So, you know, these are the real catastrophic things where we get stuff wrong. Follow the recipe, and there's a lot of evidence behind that. So the Agency for Clinical Innovation, they look at patient care, and the Clinical Excellence Commission looks at patient safety. HETI, the Health Education and Training Institute, we look at provision of education. We're the educators. So in New South Wales Health, and this all comes from the Clinical Excellence Commission around patient safety, a SAC is a severity access code, and a severity access code of 1 equals as a result of morbidity and mortality from a complication of something that's happened in a hospital. And this material, I'm not telling you any secrets, this is freely available on the CEC website. So you can see that, you know, the numbers, I've got the data up to 2017. There is some more recent data around, but that was what I caught at the time. And the top 5 risk factors in the clinical management root cause analysis reports was failure to recognise a deteriorating patient, a delay in escalating the care of somebody who's deteriorating, out of hours presentations and admissions, and particularly in rural towns. Some towns don't have a doctor, some towns have a doctor, but not after 5 o'clock. And some people have to use a camera and beam up into a larger facility to get some consultation. Confusion and delirium and diagnostic error, they were the big factors there. But when you have a look at all of, sorry, was that a question somewhere? No, interrupt anytime. When you look at the numbers at the bottom, you know, they're kind of big numbers: 854, 889, 1,201, SAC 1, and the more severe SAC 2 and 4s. These are big numbers. And, you know, across all of the presentations of a year, it's only a little percentage, but quite frankly, I don't want to be one of them, and I don't want my family members to be one of them. And when you brought it all back to what were the issues, it was care planning, communication, and adherence to policy and guideline. So a lot of what we do in simulation-based education is around those things. So before we actually come out to a rural town, we do some consultation with the town that we're coming to and the hospital that we're coming to see what their issues are. We are not doing CPR. We are not doing advanced life support, because that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do anyway. What went wrong last week? Have you got a new process? For example, they did a simulation in a regional town in New South Wales, a reasonably big regional town, and they actually did a systems simulation, working out how far it was in the terms of oxygen usage from the emergency department to the new CT scanner. And that was fine. They could, you know, put oxygen in a bottle and get it from the patient, from the emergency department to the CT scanner. But when they got there, the CT scanner was too far away from the wall to be able to plug your ventilator into the wall.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So you get not a well thought through plan. So, you know, it happens at the best of us. So it's not just patients, but there's also some systems factors as well we look at. When we look at the error-producing conditions of the big ones, which were airway management, missed injuries, inappropriate triage, and misdiagnosis, the potential solutions to all of those error-producing conditions, simulation training occurred regularly. Oh, look, it occurred so much on airway management, we said it twice. But there was a lot of places that actually don't use a procedural airway checklist for management of an airway. So when we do the emergency masterclass, and sure, every place is different. Don't care what your survey or your algorithm or your checklist looks like. But in a moment of crisis, people need a cognitive adjunct to help them through. And we're more than happy to share. We collect them along the way. Share whatever you need. The missed injuries, a standard handover. So we use an ISBAR handover, and the ambulance services use an I-MIST AMBO. So you know what's coming next, because we all speak that language about what's coming. We talked about pathways, situational awareness strategies. When we do some simulations, particularly when we do the emergency masterclass, the very last simulation of the second day, it's a 2-part simulation, and the first part's out in the paddock somewhere. On the grounds, we use a crash Kelly, which is just, it's a bit of a nothing mannequin, to be honest, but you can throw it around and there's no electrics in it, and you can hang it out of a tree or drown it or do whatever you need to do with it, and you're not going to be precious about it. So we throw it up a tree, we throw it down drains, we throw it off balconies, and how it lands is how it lands. And one of the roles of one of our confederates, we call that role the feral Cheryl role. Her role is to just get in the way and challenge their situational awareness. Now, and I can assure you, feral Cheryl has walked out with the ambulance's drug box on multiple occasions, and they'll never fall for that again. So it's not to humiliate anyone, but there's a lot going on. Pay attention. So we do a bit of that situational awareness through one of our confederates in role. Inappropriate triage, so that we talk about cognitive bias training, and we actually discuss that really quite thoroughly in our emergency masterclass. And simulated surge capacity analysis. The misdiagnosis, this is the poor information transfer, and we encourage, particularly in rural communities, if you don't, you need to move this patient on. If you, for definitive care, you cannot keep this patient here because it's not going to be safe. You know what, you need to ring a friend early. Just get on, ring a friend. Okay. So when we talk about undergraduate and postgraduate, for our undergraduates, they're professional entry students, predominantly simulations used as a skill acquisition, and it's part of a formative and or summative assessment of their performance. It focuses on the development of the individual. Predominantly it's hard skills, a little bit of soft skills, but predominantly hard skills. And the simulation training is by craft group. So you'll see all of the nurses training together, all of the paramedics training together, all of the doctors training together. And it's almost like it's this wow moment. Let's put them together as undergraduates. So some centres do that, some centres don't. And then we put them into the workforce, and then we wonder why it doesn't all kind of work together. We do interprofessional simulation because we believe that you work together, so you need to train together, train your craft together. And it makes sense, you know, if we went to a rural community taking 28 tonnes of truck, we'll have 3 nurses turn up. So I need all the doctors in the town, and I need the paramedics as well to make this a viable thing. We talk about skill retention and maintenance. We do skills as part of a context of complete care. So the simulation will not be about putting a catheter in somebody. You should know how to do that. The skill is not about putting a cannula in somebody. You know that. The skills are actually going to be around those soft factors, the human factor skills. How do you work as a team in the rapidly assembled team? So there's a lot of RAT teams. People, ships in the night, they don't know each other. They come in, they come out. There's a locum here today. It's a different locum tomorrow. How do you all work together? And that's why we do that interprofessional simulation training. So when you look at the map of New South Wales, and I apologise, this is a really awful picture, but it kind of, you can see all the little red pinpoints around NSW. That would be Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And that's where most of the sim centres are. The big beigey bit with a few green bits in the middle of it, that's the area we cover. So our coverage is not, we've got a big area, but there's not a lot of us. So we do tend to do the masterclass series. We take it out and we do masterclass. We don't stay in town for too long because it was not fair on humans, i.e. us, or the equipment. It was all just getting flogged. When you have a quick look around what simulation there is in rural New South Wales, there's very few centres of in the local health districts that have simulation centres. Most of it's associated with a rural clinical school or a university or a TAFE. And everyone goes, yes, but we've got the rural clinical school at Lismore. We can access that at a cost to the local health district and when nobody else is using it. So you can see there's all these barriers in the way, and who runs the equipment and who will do the simulation. So some partnerships are stronger and more workable than others, but I can tell you at Bega and at Cooma, there's a new one at Cooma, there's a big padlock on the door and the staff don't get to go in, which is disappointing. So, you know, there's a bit of a niche spot for us. So the tyranny of distance. Ideally, if you can get some simulation done where you work, wouldn't that be nice? The cost of taking somebody out of a rural town and getting them to, say, North Shore sim centre, they do brilliant sim. Some places it'll take you a day and a half to get there, a couple of day program and a day and a half to get back. Then you've got to backfill that person's clinical position. So it's becoming a costly exercise now. So the access to simulation equipment across big areas it's thin on the ground. So some of the bigger centres, so for example in Murrumbidgee, Wagga's just got a new sim centre put in and they farm the equipment out. But the educators have to come into Wagga and pick it up and then take it back. So, you know, there's all these barriers to that. So there's variable access to the simulation equipment and variable capability and capacity to perform it. And we recently did a study. We did some crazy might work disruptive by design work. And one of the questions we wanted to know was, how do you make a simulation? How do you make an educator? There you go, just how do you make an educator? That was a good start. And how do they start? So how does somebody start from being the doing person to then the education of the doers? So we went within health, ambulance, rail. We looked at how they do stuff in rail. We interviewed people from NASA. How do the NASA astronaut people who didn't quite make it as an astronaut, now you're the educator of the astronauts. And what we found was that often there wasn't a really formal process. It was people just landed into it, or there was some injury or limitation to them being able to do their clinical or professional duties, but they had an education skill. Generally speaking, a lot of people in New South Wales Health were ground down by the system. And so the education became more of that mandatory things that we had to do, as opposed to the creative things that we should have been doing. So there was a few things that we found when we did that study. So our program consists of lots of things. The Mobile Simulation Centre is only one of them. We've got the Mobile Simulation Centre is 28 tonnes and it's about 6.5 metres of big truck. Has to go on concrete. There's certain things that you can and can't do with it. There is no way this thing's getting into Tenterfield Hospital. Like, you know, it's just not going to happen. Now, the Mobile Simulation Centre was designed in Western New South Wales, where it's big and it's flat and it doesn't rain. And we took it to the coast, where it floods and it rains and there's bushfires and there's a little hospital on the hot side of a cliff. Like, what could possibly go wrong? So we've got a Toyota HiAce that we've fully fitted out, and we call that mini sim. So it's the little van, and that goes out. We decant some of the equipment into the mini sim. So if we're doing a rural maternity care course, we teach that one to, it's a 2-day program, interprofessional, and it's around the non-birthing sites in New South Wales, rural New South Wales, how to deliver a baby when you don't know what you're doing. Now, we're not endorsing you to deliver a baby, but we're showing you how to catch one safely and how to escalate it on. The suitcase sim model, this is a, I need a something, have you got one? And it's like, yeah, sure. And I put it in a road case, courier it to you, and then we send it back. We've got some dedicated simulation educators that we use. So Kat and I are sim educators. We're the 2 full-timers in the program, but we actually contract other simulation educators in. In the process of having endorsed a simulation framework for New South Wales Health. So this was meant to go to the Secretary this week, but some other pressing issues came up. But this talks about education that will be done and endorsed as a statewide rollout of education. These are the standards that you will follow for that education. We've had a go at virtual reality. One of the things about the Mobile Simulation Centre is that you need to provide an orientation to it. And when people walk into it, it's a little bit frightening and daunting if you've not been exposed to simulation before. So we've done a 3D virtual tour of the Mobile Simulation Centre that you can use with a mobile phone and some goggles. And we actually send that ahead before the Mobile Sim Centre comes, so that people have got a bit of an idea of what they're about to walk into. We were having a look in the beginning of COVID, and we were looking at doing some research around using virtual reality and avatars as a connectivity tool in isolation. But by the time the ethics was approved, the moment was over, so we didn't proceed. You know, just how it happens. The My Health Learning platform, that's the New South Wales Health Learning Management System. Like I said, we've got 160,000 employees. Everyone has a staff link number, a unique staff link number, and that's how you log in, and you can get your own transcript of all of the courses that you do on My Health Learning. And we've recently put one up on debriefing on My Health Learning. And the Masterclass series. So we called it the Masterclass series because we work with some really talented rural people. And so we've got one, the Emergency Masterclass. And we did the masterclasses around what keeps rural people awake at night, what makes them frightened of a night. And it's about that scary presentation that comes in and it's beyond the capability of your facility. The Rural Maternity Care course is another one of the masterclasses. But we just, because you're really not a master, you are a novice. So that's why we didn't put the masterclass on it, but we've actually put it under that umbrella. And this is about, how do I deliver a baby when somebody's 10 centimetres dilated and we're 5 hours from our nearest maternity centre? The paramedics really get involved in this. Their theory is ABCD, which is airway, breathing, circulation, diesel, and they're out. But, you know, sometimes you need to know diesel and you need to stay and deliver. So, you know, how are you going to do that safely? So we've run quite a few of those and they're really well received. The other one that we do is a simulation masterclass, and this is where we go out and we teach a 2-day program, teach the educators who will be needing to do simulation or who have some or would like more experience in simulation. We teach them how to turn a problem into a simulation. So often you get the, oh, we had 3 incidences on this, I need you to educate the people on blah, blah, blah. And it's, you know, one, is this a real true learning need? Is there a gap that education will fix? Is this a performance issue before you start writing a simulation? So we kind of, you know, go through all of that, then work out how education and simulation-based education might address that problem. So that's a 2-day program that we run as well. So we're about to do one of those this month at Narrandera, and then we're going to Narrabri for an emergency masterclass, and then the next emergency masterclass is in Gilgandra in June. So you can see we roll these out. So it usually takes us 2 days to run the program, a day and a half to get there and set up, and a day and 2 hours to pack up. We're out of there as quick as we can. We just want to go home. So these are just some happy snaps from the Mobile Simulation Centre. So the first one on the top left, you can see the artwork. They're emus, and they were done by John Dinnan. He's an artist from Silverton. And if you ever just watch The Great Race, he was that artist on The Great Race. Real colourful country character. We've got some original Pro hearts on there, and we've got permission to use those as part of our marketing. The top middle photo, that's an emergency masterclass in Nowra that we did, and that's the team in there. So it's a really confined space. So part of the pressure that we put on, so we add noise in simulation, don't need to add too much noise, just make the room small. There you go, done, tick. Then what we've done in the next one on the top right hand side, this was actually a woman, and we turned our resus room into just the clinic room, and that was a staff member with dementia and delirium, and they had to try and negotiate with that woman. So that was 2 of the allied health staff, and that was part of our interprofessional family conferencing simulation work. The bottom left hand one, this was a training day, and that's our sim mum, and that's in our ward room. We call it the ward room for want of a better reason, and that's where we deliver. Then we've got the pre-brief debrief room in the middle at the bottom. So you walk up the stairs and you go in, and kind of that's where it all is. So, you know, that's where we do the pre-briefing, and then we come straight back to there to do the debriefing. We really work hard to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable, and we're not there to actually, you know, be mean or cruel. We've seen people be traumatized in simulation. We're not doing that at all. And the bottom right-hand photo, that's actually the control room. So those who work in health, you know, that's all pretty bog standard what you do. So our educator models, we've got the LHDs have got educators. They provide their own educator to manage the MSc and provide the education. This became a problem in that the technology in it, and they use it so infrequently that it was just too hard for them to maintain. So then we actually send an educator out with the Mobile Simulation Centre to work with them, with the intention that when we go away and the Mobile Simulation Centre goes away, we're actually leaving, you know, some skill behind. So the girl on the left there, she was one of the local educators. So the educators are deployed from the local health district, and they do parts of the rotation, some of the rotation, or just the rotation within that site. So some of the educators, they manage and provide education for a cluster of hospitals. So it might be some small multi-purpose centres within a region. So we've been working really hard on our partnerships. So we've got a heady employee simulator, that's Kat, she works with us. She works in partnership and collaborates with the educators. They develop a program based on the needs of that site well ahead. And then we work also not just with the local health districts, but we work with Justice Health and Forensic Mental Health. So within every correctional facility in New South Wales, there's a clinic. And there's health workers in there, and there is as many full-time equivalent health workers in Justice Health and Forensic Mental Health as what there is in Murrumbidgee and Southern local health districts combined. You just don't see them. They're tucked away in the back room in a jail somewhere. So we've done a lot of work with them around communication, particularly between the New South Wales health staff in a correctional facility and the correctional staff, because there was a few communication issues, particularly about ringing an ambulance, because the correctional staff have to send the message to the gate. Then there's a series of problems along the way. So we do a lot of simulations around that. We cannot take any equipment in whatsoever. all you're taking in is your fingerprints and your retinas and your skills and your knowledge, maybe your car keys and your driver's license. That's all you're allowed to take in. So you have to use the equipment that they have there, and then you get scanned all on the way out so that they make sure the right one went in and the right one went out. So it's not often that we get in there. So, but when we do go, we take the mobile simulation center and park it in the car park outside so that they can get outside. We work well with Ambulance New South Wales, and particularly with their educators. So we'll actually go into Rozelle. That's where the Ambulance Education Centre is. And they have ambulance educators, and then they have clinical training officers. So they have education week so many times a year. We go in and actually provide them with some simulation skills as well. We do some scenario writing and scenario fidelity. We run simulation mannequin confidence, so how to use it, how to do confederacy and some tech skills, how to do all those sorts of things. The debriefing in our 2-day simulation masterclass, where we teach people how to do some things when they write that, they do a debrief and then we debrief the debrief. And then we talk about emotional, visual and psychological fidelity. We also talk about how to do simulation on the smell of an oily rag. You have a budget of 0. What are you going to do about that? So we do a bit of work around that. And we've actually found that there's been a really supportive relationship that's developed across the state. So we're marrying people up. Oh, you don't have one of them, but so-and-so has. So trying to get those relationships happening. We did a study in 2015 of the educator experiences with the Mobile Simulation Centre, which actually led to us changing the way we do it, so that we actually send our educator out and then they partner up. It was just too hard for the educators to manage the Mobile Sim Centre. We did a full program logic evaluation of the emergency masterclass in 2016, and we did an independent formal large-scale evaluation done of the entire program in 2017. So as a result of that, some other things that we've added to it. So we've talked about the mini sim van. We do a lot more in situ sim. So we don't want people to think that you need a sim center. You don't need a sim center, and you don't need a mobile trailer, and you don't need all of that. You just need a room, really. So we teach people the benefits of in situ sim and real simulation, not just teaching over plastic simulation. So there was a site that we went to, and they do a simulation in the emergency department every Friday morning, and ambulance brings in the mannequin and he does the handover, and he's already moulaged it up. He does great moulage, and then all the doctors and the nurses work, blah 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 blah, and then the ambulance fellow, he's dismissed, off you go, and then the sim runs, and then the sim finishes, and then the nursing staff are dismissed to go off and do their own duties, and then a whiteboard's dragged in. And then they start the lecture, which is kind of teaching over plastic, let people have a run, and then it becomes the sage on the stage. So there's different levels of what simulation is, and there's nothing wrong with it, but we do we're supposed to be a bit more purist around that. We have year-round access for staff with no equipment through SimCafe Sim. The simulation framework and the standards for Sim are about to be endorsed and rolled out. Doing a little bit in virtual reality, looking at that space, but by the time we get there, the technology is dated or we've moved on to something else. So it's a bit slow to go, and it's about being risk adverse about how we invest our dollars in that space, because it changes so quickly. We've got an online offering now on My Health Learning, and it's around debriefing in simulation, and it's called SimChat. So we found that the novice educators, lots of simulation debriefing models, but they don't know which one to pick. And as you get more experienced, you kind of pick a bit of that one, and a bit of that one, a bit of that one, a bit of that one, when you know your audience. So you get to know your audience during the simulation, and then you debrief according to which model would work best for them. But when you're a beginner, you're not quite sure which one to use. So we've given them a tool to work on that. We've talked about our masterclasses, our Savvy Sim, and the promotion of the SimCafe Sim, and we've got an educator alumni. We've got a network of educators across the state that we tap into regularly. So we talk to them, what are you up to? What are you doing with this? How's that working? So we provide them with some support. We've got a few publications, the Sim Guide, the Allied Health Scenarios, Templates and Tips for Simulation-Based Education. And I believe that some of the templates, though, are available beyond New South Wales Health, but the guide isn't. There's a simulation-based education. This was professional entry student education and training. That was a document written under the Health Workforce Australia when that funding was available. We've got the education and training requirements for sim professionals. So these were the priorities from a survey of simulation professionals of what they needed and what they wanted as part of their training. We've got an interprofessional family conference training program. There's something like 27 allied health professionals, and they seem to get a little bit left out of simulation at times. So we deliberately reach out and include them. And look, we do things that are, we've got the bariatric man, and we put somebody in the bariatric suit, and they've got to get them in and out of the car with their legs braced, and how do you do all of those sorts of things? And our sim chat with our My Health Learning. So I've just got a couple of examples of some new and emerging things that we're working at. We're looking at creating a game, and we're in the process of putting it together. When we teach the emergency masterclass, we're actually using a lot of stuff around the drugs in critical care. And in the scenario, they have to do a delayed sequence induction. So, give the right drugs at the right time, and work as a team. So, we give them the lecture, and then, do some things, and then we're going to do a simulation about that. Some people just nail the simulation because they've been exposed to that before, but some people in the simulation have not been exposed to particular drugs, particular medication, and it kind of hardly seems fair. So we're developing a desktop game, like a card game, where they'll have a case-based example, and then they need to play their cards about what drugs they're going to give. So we're in the process of writing that and trialing that. We've got our online debriefing module and tool called SimChat. Pretty slow. We're moving away from the VR, AR, MR technology. It's expensive and it takes a lot of work. And Kat and I are a team of two covering the state. So, you can appreciate our time's a bit pressed. The other things that we got called away from in 2020, we did not do one face-to-face anything, which, as much as sometimes we complain about being on the road, when you're in lockdown for 12 months, we had cabin fever, 10 hours a day in the chair doing Zoom conferencing and stuff. But we did the Care Assistant program. So this was a program that was written, a bespoke program of online, virtual, and My Health Learning modules, so that if the catastrophic situation and scenario was to arise and you send all of your registered nurses to ICU to ventilate, who's going to be looking after people at the bedside? So this was the deployment of Qantas employees. This was the deployment of people who work in hotel services, food services, linen services. They would be moved into, coming behind the curtain and under the direction of a registered nurse, provide care. So we needed to train these people. Now, the problem was some of these people that applied for the positions and were accepted for the training program. So this was a proof of concept training program. And it was to see if we could do it more than anything. They've never been deployed. We never had to. And it was a 1 week online, digital, interactive, 40 hours training program for 1 week, and then 1 week of training in their work site. So we wrote the program, we rolled it out to over 100 employees that were put on, and we had 3 weeks to write it, deliver it, test it, and implement it. So it was massive. So how does somebody who has never washed somebody or changed a bed in a hospital, there was something like 13 videos, there was 130 still shots that we did. It just went on and on and on, the work that we put into this. And that's been all analysed, evaluated, wrapped up and put up on a shelf. Should they have to do something similar in the future, I'll pull it off the shelf and start again. We did all of the work with the close contact call training. So we trained over thousands and thousands of close contact callers, and it was a rapid response. So it was a 3-hour, highly scripted, virtual online Zoom education program with a simulation scenario within that, where they had to do some role play around making the call to a close contact. So this is somebody who's been in close contact with a positive case of COVID, and you're going to ring them up and say, guess what? You've been in close contact. You need to stay at home for 2 weeks, and talk that person through that. And that program has since been lifted down to Victoria and South Australia as well. So whilst we weren't doing simulation, we were off doing other things. We get rebadged as something else. This is the SimChat debriefing template. So this was for people who are new to simulation and were looking for some sort of guide until they actually understood all of the different sorts of models. And anybody can still get on and do the NetSim training. That's still available, and it goes through all of those models. So it's set the scene, introduction to the debrief, make the scenario clear, clarify the learning, how did it go, analyze and address what happened, and take stock and takeaways. So how are you going to do that? And then we wanted them to take notes. So, you know, this is the education session. These are the learning outcomes, and 3, don't give them any more. Just make it simple. 3 learning outcomes. Tell them the learning outcomes before you go in, and we're going to debrief to those learning outcomes. When they come out of the simulation, tell them the learning outcomes again. This is what we're going to debrief, because people will go off on some rant somewhere and tell me some long-winded stories that I really don't have time for. So it's about controlling that simulation, and take some notes on the way. You know, at 1 minute and 32, you said this. What did that mean? And then what did the rest of the team hear that? So what actually happened within that simulation? So you actually need some really hard and fast notes so that you bring it back, so that when you're doing the debrief, you speak with facts. There you go. And that's kind of a roundabout tour of how we're doing some simulation in rural New South Wales.
That wasn't a tour, that was a wild ride.
It was. So, you know, there's 2 of us, but, you know, we've got lots of educators out in rural New South Wales, and we partner with them. Like, they're really skilled at what they do. They're under-resourced. That's the real issue. So,
some questions, comments, feedback for Todd. That was one wild ride through a huge amount of work. Some questions. Well, who would like to?
For the army of 2.
For the army of 2, yes. So,
I've got things I want to talk about. So, Todd, I love your SimChat. So my problem with debriefing, especially in healthcare, is all these complex things, and cognitively people at best can remember 3 or 4 things. It needs to be a simple process that we can all engage with, not just the expert. And I think that looks absolutely awesome. So hopefully that's freely available around the world.
Well, I don't know about that yet. So it's on My Health Learning. So to get into that, that's, you know, the New South Wales Health thing. Google SimChat and see what you get. Just putting it out there. I don't know if anyone.
We should encourage it, because why shouldn't New South Wales get recognition for coming up with a process that works, rather than many of the academic processes that work with the 5 people who built it and no one else?
I agree with Marcus, because I'm reading a paper at the moment about another model for debriefing. Like, everybody says there's no model for debriefing, so here's one, and it's like, But
we found it was just confusing. The real learning happens there, and this is your opportunity to get it right or get it just god awful wrong. Well, we've seen some awful ones.
I'd love to see it, you and Kat or one of your educators present it at the ASC in October.
Yeah, happy to.
Do an international audience and do it at ISAGA. I'll make sure that I've sort of sent the information for ISAGA out to our newsletter, so it'll be going around shortly. That way you are making it available as much as you can. And I do think you're putting I'm with Marcus, you're putting a very different spin on how people debrief. You know, the paper I'm reading is interesting, but I opened it and thought, oh God, another article on debriefing saying there's nothing about debriefing.
So when we teach the simulation masterclass, these are educators. So, you know, they've done stuff before, and you know, they fumble through. So when we did the ethnographic interviews on how did you become an educator, pretty much you fumble through. And you get there. Some people are highly qualified, highly skilled, and they nailed it. Some people are there by virtue, or they applied for a position and they learnt on the job as they went along. So when we teach the simulation masterclass, we show them all of the different, and the pearls and the diamonds and the this and the that, and then it's like, you know, it's all confusing. Here, would you like to try with a beginner's tool? Ta-da! And they're like, oh, where was this? Where was this? So, you know, it's a bit of everything, but it's got those there for you, and you take this, you have a notepad of these for each sim, and then you chuck that one out and you write another one.
Yeah. No, I like
sorry, is the prep, that the work you did on prep for basic clinical support with those Qantas and hotel people, internationally, the demand for that is through the roof. There are countries where they're relying 100% on volunteers to replace clinical staff.
Yeah,
Just another
absolutely.
clinical staff taken out. We've got Papua New Guinea in deep trouble. I'd hope it's not sitting on the shelf. I'd hope it would be freely to download with a disclosure of not taking legal responsibility for what people end up like, but just make it available to the world public, because a huge amount of effort must have gone into that.
And it was really funny. There was a comment like about concern about the participants. We call it the seat time, how much time you spend in the seat. Let me tell you, we were wearing Ted stockings as writers because we were sitting in the chair for so long. We were putting in 12-hour days over and over and over. I think they wrote the close contact call training in 12 days, 14 days, because there was a mad need now. You know, how do you train these people? And the people that came from Qantas, they had a real service, service mentality. They were brilliant. They engaged. We'd put them into breakout rooms. We do an activity. So the thing about the whole Zoom thing, every 5 minutes, there has to be some sort of interactivity to keep them engaged. And then we had the stretch break, and we had bad music, and, you had to move out of the way because people were standing up from their desks, and we had all these bellies in our cameras. And and then in the afternoon, so, some days were 3-hour Zooms, some 4-hour Zooms, but lots of breaks in between. We gave them lunch breaks, morning tea breaks. Leave your cameras on, just mute and go for a walk, go and do what you need to do. Then in the afternoon, they did some online modules. So some of these people who've never worked in health, they wouldn't know what garbage bin to put things in. They wouldn't know what a sharp is and how do you deal with it. So our premise that we were coming from, our guiding principle was that these people needed to be safe. We become all a little bit immune and a bit numb to things that happen in health because we do it every day. But what if that's the first time you ever saw somebody vomit and you had to deal with that, or you had to clean somebody or wash somebody and you had to deal with that, or change sheets? And it got to the point, we've done things for so long, when we were doing the videos of things, we're like, oh, is that the right way to do that? Oh, no, we were looking things up, stuff that we do every day just to make sure we were getting it right. Have things changed since I made a bed as a clinician? Have things changed on this and have things changed on that? So there's a series of instructional videos on that were in that. And then they did these online modules. And then the first part of the next day was a recap of what they learned and some activities around the online modules that they did. We needed to make sure that they were safe physically, psychologically and culturally, and so were the patients. So that was our premise that we were coming from. So it was about nurturing and caring for each other. That's where we were coming from when we wrote that program.
Wow. I've got a lot of notes here. Todd, I'll be after you afterwards. Pip, you had a question?
Thanks for that, Elle. Todd, great presentation and great to see the simulation models going ahead. It's obviously been running for quite some years, I've been aware. I just was wondering, do you only serve LHDs and PHNs, or do you actually go to AMSs as well?
No, we do New South Wales Health. That's our remit.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
So anything outside of New South Wales Health is not an option. Not
an option. And trust me, we've got more than enough work. There's, that's our first priority. So some of the universities, like it was the University of Western Sydney wanted us to take the mobile simulation centre to Campbelltown. And it's like, no, you've got a simulation centre there. You don't need us. And it almost becomes like this truck's a novelty. It's a workhorse. We need to take it out and we need to work it in the communities where it is. Then some of the universities say, well, what about my medical students? And it's like, if your medical student is on the ward doing a clinical placement and the rest of the team are coming for simulation, by all means, come for simulation, because we do interprofessional simulation. And if something happens on the ward and you're there as a student doctor or nurse or physio or whatever, you're more than welcome to come with us. But we don't do anything specifically for undergraduates and the AMSs and the not New South Wales Health staff. We just don't have the resource for it.
So can I just?
Yeah, they don't have any resources either. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's
you guys don't have any time for them, and they haven't got any resources.
I know.
It's we need to do better in that regard.
So AMS is Aboriginal Medical
Service. Yep.
And are they an independent entity or a non-state government? Like, how do they manage their funding? What's their structure and reporting relationships?
To be honest, I've only just come into a project working with one of them, so I'm not the authority on it. From what I understand, they're not part of New South Wales Health. They're run by community and led by community, and they have, I don't know what their funding structure is, but some of the things I've come across just in the last week, I tell you what, made me pretty sad and pretty angry.
So
the lack of,
previous
lack of ability to help them, you know. So
a previous position that I held within HEDI, I managed the training and support unit. So this is the training and support unit, and they provide training and support to support the clinicians who care for Aboriginal mothers, babies and children as part of the first 2,000 days framework. So yeah, so we were actually, there were some people that actually work for AMSs, but also work with early Aboriginal childhood care. So we were able to, you know, get in that way, but they had to have a foot in both camps.
Okay. Next question. Well, I guess then for me, Todd, how difficult or how simple has it been to have to create that interdisciplinary, you know, whatever it is, process of sort of getting people from like the multi-health?
In all honesty, it's really easy. Rurally, it is really easy. They do it every day in the workplace, so they're included. So you know, your nurses, doctors, paramedics, the allied health, the housekeeper. We use security. If there's security at the local health facility, they love coming to a simulation because you get to do your job in security. So, you know, when you've got feral Cheryl being out in the paddock somewhere, you need somebody to contain that. We need to, you know, let people know what we're doing. We've got signs up everywhere that it is a simulation. We've had the police arrive and an ambulance. No, it was the fire brigade that were called. When we were doing a simulation, somebody thought it was real, and it's like, no, this is not real. But they engage really well because they have to. They rely on each other quite a lot in small towns. They really do. So it might be a 1-bed emergency department, a 2-bed acute ward, and a 10 or 15-bed aged care facility under one roof. And
Right.
you might have 3 staff on. And they work down on the ward with the aged care residents. And then when somebody comes into ED, somebody goes up there and deals with that. But you don't know what you're dealing with. It could be, you know, the cough, the cold, it could be the trauma. So yeah, the towns stick together and they work well. And when you're really pushed in resus, you can call a SIRS assist. So this is a clinical emergency response service assist. You get onto co-ward at ambulance and then they'll send you more paramedics, and you don't let your paramedics leave. They do great airway. Just stand there, mate. Do airway. Don't send them to try and find blood gas syringes. They won't know where they are. But you can send your housekeepers to do that because often they do stores and, you know, they do multiple jobs. Bagging, if you show somebody what to do, if you have to, you'll be using a non-clinician to bag your patient. It's just what you need to do. So getting people to come and do simulation interprofessionally, really, really easy.
Right. Okay. That's really nice to hear. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Do you find that, Marcus?
Absolutely. The hard bit can be dealing with the case management of the day. So backfilling people and having enough people able to be released is normally the biggest problem.
Yep.
In many of our sites, they're married to each other.
Yep. Yeah, it happens.
You'll find if they've been there a long time, they're heavily invested in the local community.
Todd, can I, before you go on, Marcus, just let me add something. When we go out to sites like Balranald and Lightning Ridge, the educators from Western New South Wales, far Western New South Wales, all of the educators come in, they go and work on the ward so the staff can come out. So there's a bit of an arrangement there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
On that, Todd, I want to congratulate you for keeping a mobile vehicle on the road for such a long time.
It's hard work.
Most of the mobile simulations in the world have closed down. And so I do want you to write a paper on that, how you've managed to succeed, or a presentation on how you managed to succeed at that.
Not only that, there will be awards and acknowledgements at the Congress this year. You guys need to watch for that to come out and put in.
Okay.
Yeah. You should be a shoe-in.
But on that one, Todd, I want to know where your replacement plan is for the two of you, because that's when the lead clinical people involved in mobile simulations leave, 90% of the time, that's the terminal condition.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we don't in healthcare provide any plans to replace critical people such as yourself with your skill base that is going to be pretty unique.
I've got a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that answers that question for Todd. Calvin's streaming across the screen and he's saying, I've got so many things to do. I've been put on this earth to do this, so many things. At this point, I'm so far behind, I'm going to live forever.
It feels like that sometimes. It really does. At this point, I think the real issue for us was there was a lot of love and investment, physical, psychological, and financial, to get that mobile simulation centre up and moving and running. So there was a lot of work that went into that. It's named after Sister Alison Bush, who is just a legend midwife. She has got an Order of Australia medal, and she's since passed. But she was the first Aboriginal qualified midwife, and she was the only nurse that I know of who's got honorary membership to the Australian and New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Like, they let a nurse in. Like,
wow.
Yeah, you know. So this was a woman, an Aboriginal woman in the 60s, who did her midwifery, and then she worked at RPA, and she single-handedly changed infant mortality in the Aboriginal communities in that region, because people weren't coming into the hospital. So she reached out and got Aboriginal people to come in, so they got really good care. Absolute serious legend. And that mobile simulation centre is named in her honour. So, like, there's a lot of pressure on to keep this thing running and to keep that story and that legend going. I think, and in Aboriginal culture, and I might have got this wrong, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way, but sometimes the story goes that Aboriginal people who've passed, there's the Mimi, and the Mimi can be naughty and mischievous. So when our AV system plays up, we blame Sister Alison. It's like, what's she doing? Come on, Alison, please. We're trying to do a good job. And every, you know, when you're out in the road and you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no technician and your AV's mucking up, it becomes a problem. So, you know, we do quick workarounds. So so there's a lot of people put a lot of investment in it, and it's really important for us to continue that legacy. It is hard work. That's why we only take it out for the bigger events. We don't just run this consistently. There were times we'd be on the road for 40 weeks of the year. Like, the machine's not going to take it. This thing's 12 years old. Yeah, it's just not going to take it. So we need to preserve it as long as we can. So we save it for the bigger masterclass stuff. And it saves us as well. We couldn't do 40 weeks anymore on the road. It's just too hard.
So I can see I could see a doctorate in all you've just talked about, Todd. When you retire, do your doctorate.
I was going to prune roses, but anyway.
Or continue winning jam medal prizes.
Oh, yes. Raspberry jam.
I love that.
I love jam.
Libby, did you have any questions?
Yeah, Todd, can I just ask, you know, the masterclasses? So if I got it right, the masterclasses are based on feedback from each of the areas that you go to?
So what we do on the masterclasses, we do a learning needs analysis first. Yeah. So we do a survey out to the system, and we have one of our faculty that we co-opt in, who also happens to be a retrieval specialist from CareFlight. So we know what's going on out there and what they retrieve out and what the problems are, and we target that. So we've recently done a learning needs analysis around the other thing that keeps people awake at night, which is paediatric emergencies. So as a response to the Henry Review and around providing education, we'll be looking at doing a paediatric masterclass for rural communities. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I guess what I'm interested in is, do you see, you know, kind of the concept that you learn through learning, you know, you learn through assessment. So kind of the pre-briefs, the debriefs, then you go away and, you know, kind of you would do more learning. Do you see an increase in the amount, or I guess a more targeted understanding of what you don't know, you know, because I guess what you've said is, like, there's a huge range of stuff that people do. And yeah, I'm just interested if people become more nuanced, I guess, in understanding.
Yeah, so, and I'll answer that through the vignettes that we get.
Mhm.
So, you know, we keep in contact because you can't spend 2 days with people and not get involved, and you're in a country
Yeah.
town and you know, they invite you out for tea and you go out to the pub with them for lunch and blah, blah, blah. So you all get to know each other. So they send us feedback, and we were in Junee. We left on Saturday night. Sunday, 2 girls were working and the facial burns comes in with airway issues. And they said, what you taught us yesterday, we used today. And so and it's almost, and I don't want to put the moniker and the negative on anybody, but, you know, we go and we teach you how to deliver a baby, and then they deliver the 36-weeker. Then we get feedback from the retrieval teams who go out and they go, you know, they'll catch up with the ambulance drivers and the paramedics there, and they'll say, oh, what you taught me that day, I'm still using it and it's legend. So we get these vignettes back, which kind of reaffirms that we're doing the right thing. We're having troubles, particularly the medical staff, getting them in. We get doctors. Doctors are tricky, and we do our master classes on a Friday and a Saturday. So they've only got to give up 1 day of rooms time and 1 day of a Saturday, because we don't want to prolong the GP waiting list either. We're registered with not with ACRM, so they can actually get procedural grants, you know, to pay for somebody to backfill or to cover the cost of them being out of their rooms on Fridays. But yet we still have troubles. Narendra, there's a need, but we're having a bit of troubles getting some GPs to that one. So they're often GP VMOs. Nurses, paramedics fill up like that. Hetty does the Rural Generalist Training Program, and that advanced skill year for GPs who want to have an advanced skilled specialty. So we've extended invitations to them, and we're still having troubles recruiting medical officers for Narrabri. So I don't know what the story is there. But when they come, then the word gets out, and then they go, oh, can you come back next time? Can you come back? It's like, listen, we've just done Bathurst, won't be coming to Bathurst for a while. We've got the rest of the state to cover. Yeah. So it's a bit tricky.
I can imagine. Well, we're just on the hour. Did anybody else have any other questions? Or and Todd, I think we'll need you back again to talk about some of the other things so that we can put it.
Oh, Vinod.
You had a question? Yeah.
Yeah, a few impressions. Your MSc is a great idea. It covers a number of simulation themes that we normally take several sessions to cover, such as system design, a serious game, debriefing, and so on. It looks like it saves many lives also, apart from what normal education does. I got to hear about RATs, the rapidly assembled teams.
Yep.
And I'm going to study further, and this is going to take me outside the simulation arena. Oh yes, slightly before this, somebody I think talked about how college students in Australia behaved, or the attitude. I must confirm to you that students in India also behave the same. Probably there is a quantum entanglement or something that's happening. Thank you very much for a very exciting and informative talk.
You're very welcome, Vinod. Very welcome.